Welcome to Senior Speak New Hampshire on your Concord TV, sponsored by AARP. I am Karen Ulmer-Dorsch, the producer-host of this program, and thank you for joining us today. We are approaching a very exciting time in New Hampshire, as we all know, as we move into September, October, November, etc. And we are looking forward to the 2024 election and its influence here in New Hampshire. And of course, we know that we have a tremendous impact on what happens during this time. So I thought it was important to invite my dear friend, Neil Levesque, who is the director of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, whom you all have met earlier, and have him give us a little kind of an overview of what he's seeing about this particular time and how it may be the same or different than other times that we've had this. So Neil, welcome and thank you again. You all know that my guests come and give of their time and their expertise to share with you. And I'm ever so grateful to you, Neil, for doing that, because I know how busy you are.
Well, thank you for having me on, Karen. This is great. I'm happy to do it. And you're right, we have been very busy. We had Tim Scott today. Nikki Haley will come on Friday. We're doing about 6 to 8 big events a week.
Wow.
So it's nonstop at the Institute of Politics, and we have a front row seat into what's happening, and I'm happy to give you my sort of nonpartisan view of what's going on, what voters can expect.
Right, because we are. AARP, as you know, is nonpartisan, as is the Institute of Politics. But AARP we are interested in the views of these people who are wanting to be our leaders. And we have 4 questions that we ask everybody that is hoping to fill that space in the White House. And that is, we're interested, first of all, in Social Security and how they're going to secure Social Security for not only us, but our grandchildren. We're interested in caregiving and how they're going to improve the lot of people who do caregiving in our nation. And then our other 2 interests are Medicaid and prescription drugs, lowering the price of prescription drugs. So we see all of these candidates about as frequently as they come because we want to ask them their viewpoint. So let's go with it, okay? So what are you finding about this particular time?
Okay. Well, the 2024 election is going to be very different than the 2020 election and every election before that. You know, the fact is that every time we have an election, things are different. We have a new slot of candidates. We have a different sort of set of parameters about what candidates are looking for. Certainly a new set of issues. Think about COVID.
Absolutely.
In 2020 was a big issue. Now it's sort of a thing of the past. So there's always new issues. And so candidates and the voters need to contend with these new issues. The other factor is that there's new ways to communicate with voters. So certainly when I got started in this business, you would be licking envelopes and sending handwritten notes to people in your town about, you know, which candidate could be the best. Now, you know, you pick up your phone and it's all social media and things like that. So it's very different. Things change. So in 2024, the main thing is that we have a Republican campaign going on, and really the Democratic incumbent, Joe Biden, through a set of maneuvers through the DNC, has decided he's not going to campaign here in New Hampshire. And if we do go first, like we've always gone first, that they won't count those ballots at their convention. So they won't do that. And as a result, there are 2 candidates running on that side, as well as Joe Biden. We don't know if he's going to put his name on the ballot. You have to put your name on the ballot. You have to consent. Or if there'll be some write-in campaign or there won't be any campaign.
Wow.
So that's on the Democratic side. And you have, of course, Robert Kennedy Jr. running, who's making a lot of waves about running on the Democratic side as one candidate who's challenging. But on the Republican side, we have sort of a very strange situation. Okay, so you have Trump, who is really, he's an incumbent for all intents and purposes. So he has a major lead in the polls,
Yeah.
and he has a lot of support amongst the party people. So when they have polls, the polls are showing that he has this tremendous lead. And that is typical of someone who's an incumbent. Voters typically in America don't throw out incumbents unless
Right.
they have a really good reason why they should. And as of now, he maintains that significant lead. But we have this other crop of candidates, including his own pick for Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, his UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, his friend, Chris Christie, who helped him with debate prep. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And so you have this really strange situation where Mike Pence, for example, may say, well, he can't really criticize Trump because that he was part of that administration.
Right.
And how do you take credit for something that was in the administration because that's the person you're running against? So awkward. Yeah, it's sort of like a Thanksgiving meal at my family's house. It's all very awkward. There's some new people and some people you knew about in the past,
Right.
and you really don't know what to say to them.
Yeah.
So that's the way it is. We've had a lot of activity in New Hampshire so far, and that's good for voters. And a lot of voter touches is what we call it. So a lot of people going out to different things, and voters really here in New Hampshire have the opportunity to go out and meet these candidates. Heck, I was downtown Concord. I was walking into this hotel on Main Street, and in was walking Chris Christie. So these are the kinds of things that can
Yes.
happen on a regular basis here in New Hampshire.
And it is the only state, I'm convinced, it is the only state in the union where these kind of things happen. Because when I go back to the state where I was born, in Kansas, people they're not talking about any of this. They don't know any of these people. We have the opportunity to see these people and get to know them as people, not politicians, but people. And I'm absolutely floored when I go to these events and I don't see the people of New Hampshire taking advantage of that opportunity. It's such a wonderful one.
Sometimes voters feel like they can't participate, like they don't know who's having the house party,
Yes.
but in other cases, former Senator Scott Brown has been having these sort of barbecues in this backyard of this thing in Rye.
Yeah.
And the last one he had, Robert Kennedy Jr. drew 2,000 people from the tiny town of Rye
Wow.
for an event. So there is some activity that's going
Good.
on like that where people feel that they have it. You know, that you're right about New Hampshire. So people joke that it's our state sport, but really what it is that we do feel that we can communicate with candidates, that we can ask questions and we can ask follow-up questions. We feel close to the decision making.
We do.
When you go to a state like California or Kansas, you feel so distant from any kind of decision. And distant meaning you don't feel that you have the
That's
power of a vote
You really don't.
that you do here in New Hampshire. And we take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about being in this state.
I think it's absolutely a privilege to be a part of this. I don't think I ever felt so alive as I did in the 2020 and all of the work that we did then.
Yeah.
That was just the most exciting time.
Well, for a lot of people who are watching this, they probably don't know that Karen and I spent a lot of time together because we were always going to candidate events, or you were coming to the Institute.
Right.
You were out there, and you can ask questions directly of these candidates, and you're
Absolutely.
participating. Participation is so very important in democracy. The argument is good, but participation is more important. And if we don't have people participating, if they're just,
Right.
going back and forth to work and not investing in their local communities or
Yeah.
local democracy, it's going to not turn
It's
out
very
so well.
scary. And you know, it is particularly scary at this time when democracy is being threatened all over the world.
Yes.
And it's just so terribly important that we wake up and recognize the benefit that we have to be here in a state where we can approach leaders and talk to them as if they were a person that lived next door to us.
Yes. And that makes better candidates and better leaders. So people will say, well, I don't want to go to New Hampshire as a candidate because I don't want to get asked these questions. And, the truth is that it does make you better. In 2016, when Hillary Clinton was going around New Hampshire, she kind of lived in a little bit of a bubble. Not for her own fault, but when you're a U.S. Senator and the First Lady and everything else, there's a little bit of a bubble. And she had no idea the impact of things like heroin here in New Hampshire and fentanyl and things like that. And when she went to different spots, people kept saying, the number one issue for me is the fact that my nephew died of this and this is really affecting me. And she started to hear from voters and figure out that this was not something that she saw on the evening news.
Yeah.
That's good for our leaders because then when they go to the White House, they say, you know what I learned when I was in New Hampshire? I learned this.
Exactly.
So it's good.
Yes. So, Neil, the fact that we don't know when our primary is going to be yet, do we?
We don't, and there's a really good reason why. So there are always states that want to hold similar elections, and they challenge us and say, we're going to go ahead of New Hampshire. But they can't go ahead of New Hampshire if they don't know when New Hampshire is.
That's right.
And so they end up setting their dates and saying what they're going to do. And then eventually the Secretary of State will say, this is when we're going to do this. The good thing about New Hampshire is we have tuned in voters. We're going to know when it is. We'll have plenty of time. It will most likely be mid-January, most likely.
Yeah.
The real problem isn't that the voters won't have enough time to figure this out and get to the polls. The real problem will be for things like a presidential debate where there's a lot of planning involved, there's a lot of preparation, they spend a lot of money, networks spend a lot of money on all that has to go into it. So it might be a little bit difficult for them to figure out, okay, it's going to be on this date and therefore we're going to have a presidential debate the weekend before like they have. So that's really the only difficult, but as far as printing the ballots and getting them to the town clerks, we can do it rather quickly.
And as far as the debates are concerned, do we have dates for those, or do we know anything about those?
They haven't set the debate that they say is going to take place here in New Hampshire. There is a debate next week, and they do have a calendar for some of the debates. We've obviously just had one so far. And they'll pick the networks that they're going to go on to. They're interesting. I will tell you that I don't find them very substantial. I think that today's things, we were kind of joking earlier that if I owned a whole bunch of Coca-Cola stock and Coca-Cola needed a new CEO or president, we wouldn't say put 8 of them on a stage and see who has the best one-liner, and that's who we should pick.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's a new phenomenon with presidential debates is this idea that the audience, sometimes up to 4,000 people like in the last debate, becomes almost a part of it, where they're yelling at candidates and screaming at candidates and saying profanity and everything else. It's very much akin to the old Jerry Springer talk show or the World Wrestling Federation, where in those situations, the television group was really looking to make the audience part of the program. And I think in some ways that's what's happened here.
Yeah, because I did not take debate as a class, but I know what is taught in debate as a class. And it is respect, it is do not interrupt one another. I mean, none of the rules of debate were handled in that last one that we just saw.
No, I think, and again, for better or for worse, presidential campaigning has changed just like everything else. I mean, this week they have gotten rid of the dress code on the U.S. Senate, which really for a lot of us is just amazing to me that you would ever walk on the floor of the U.S. Senate in anything other than a coat and tie.
Exactly.
But things have changed, and for better or for worse, and particularly with debates and things like that, and the threshold that voters think is rude. And a lot of people may remember that when Ronald Reagan debated George Bush in 1980 in Nashua High School on February 23rd, 1980. He did it, and he had to sort of show some anger without seeming crazy or rude.
Oh.
And he was able to do it. He said, "Mr. Green, I paid for this microphone." And in doing so, he impressed the voters. But nowadays, it seems like they're just trying to get as much attention as possible by sort of screaming and yelling
Absolutely.
and interrupting. And is that good for the process? Some would argue it's not. That would be me. And others would argue it gets
Right.
attention, and therefore, if the candidate gets attention, that's in the end a beneficial thing.
Right. I was talking with my husband about this current aura that we have in the state and my disappointment that it seemed to me less people were interested in coming to hear what each of these candidates, even though they're not known, have to say, because we don't know. One of them might jump out there as a forerunner. And he said, well, but he said, this is a Republican primary, and so Democrats aren't going to be interested in who is that. And I thought, but everybody should be, because one of these people might be president or vice president.
Yes. And people should. And part of that, I don't want to blame the voters for that. I'll say that a lot of that has to do with the fact that today's world, the old days, you lived in Concord, you got the Concord Monitor in a paper form, you read it, you saw all the obituaries, you saw the sports score of Concord High School. And nowadays, that paper, people aren't buying that newspaper.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they get on their phones a homogenization of news, or they get not information, but affirmation of their own opinions in the news.
Exactly.
And so what ends up happening is you're not getting that local feel for news like you used to. And
No.
you're not as tied to your local community, both through the news or other social activities. If you ask clubs like the Rotary Club in any given community, you'll see that the Rotary Club membership, or the Elks Club, or whatever it is, has dwindled.
Right.
Because people come home and they're much more nationalized in their thinking
Right.
than they are localized.
And the really sad thing about that is that I believe that is a large reason that we have people who are depressed and isolated and lonely,
You're exactly right.
because they don't know what's going on in their own community.
Yeah.
Isn't that a sad, sad story?
You don't always love who the Rotary Club speaker is, but you can love having a friend at Rotary Club who you sit next to.
Exactly.
And the local communities don't really exist. I used to live in the small town of Henniker, and the small town of Henniker had a hardware store, it still does, great hardware store, a gas station, a pharmacy, and everybody kind of worked in town, and they got together in these social organizations.
Right.
And now they get in their car in the morning, they drive to Boston, or they work from home, and they're not connected to it.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a very big social change, I think, for a lot of what goes on in America and how it affects things like voting
Right.
and things like democracy. That's
Right.
very important.
Right.
How many times do we go to the polls in a small community and it says, vote for 3 on your ballot, and there's only one name?
Exactly. Yeah. Isn't that? I'm just really. I keep trying to be positive, because I have grandchildren, and I'm hoping to be a great grandmother one of these days. And I'm hoping that the human race will continue to survive along with our environment, which worries me even more. But it's something's going to have to change for that to happen, it seems to me.
Well, that worry and that concern, I think, to some degree gets inflamed on some of these news stations where people bring about the bad news, the world's coming to an end.
Right.
And so one interesting thing that we've picked up, because we do polling at the Institute, is that so many Americans think the country's on the wrong track.
Yeah.
About 75%. Basically, if we had some donuts or pizza, and we said, what's the best? We couldn't get 75% of the people to
No,
agree
you
on
couldn't.
anything. So when you get 75% of Americans to say, yeah, the country's on the wrong track, you dig a little bit deeper. You say, well, why is that? And there's a general feeling of malaise. The feeling of pessimistic about the future is something that is not, you don't hold the patent on that one.
Yeah, no,
A lot
I know.
of people do.
I know.
But these news stations have been capturing that. They inflame it to some degree, and then it becomes worse and worse. The only thing I'll say being positive about the future is Americans, we've always had problems in America.
Right.
And it's never been perfect, but it's the best anybody's ever had. And we do get through these things.
We do.
And we adapt.
We
and
do.
so far, so good. And,
Yes.
And you know what? A lot of people say, well, right now the country is on the wrong track. This is bad, this is bad. If you look back, there are no gas lines. Inflation is not great, but it's not super bad. Unemployment rate is exceedingly
Yeah.
low. You look at other countries like Ukraine where they have a
Right.
war going on. We're not dealing with that. Generally, we have a lot to eat. We have a lot going on for us. The country is in great shape.
I
So,
think it is too.
you know,
And actually, that's one of the things that I take a magazine that's called Yes, and it's a magazine that is about all of the sustainable work that little groups are doing. And it gets me through because, I know that people are good. People want to help. And the first thing that happens in a disaster is you see that.
Oh, absolutely.
You see those people come together. So I have great faith that we will endure this current, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But okay, so viewers, I really hope that you take time to listen to and go to some of these events that are happening in this state that are unique to this state. And definitely, if you have not been to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, that's a place that you absolutely need to go. Tell us a little bit about that, Dave.
Sure. So the Institute of Politics is on the campus of St. Anselm College. It's very easy to get to from central New Hampshire. We're right on the outskirts of Manchester. Free parking and all that. Very easy. It's a 20,000 square foot facility with the college students take the classes inside the building. We do polling. We do different historic exhibits. So it's kind of an interesting walkthrough.
It's a
You can see
fascinating
politics
place.
up front, and personal, and all the history of the New Hampshire presidential primary. But we have 2 auditoriums, and we're doing, again, though, about 6 to 8 big events a week. And so there's a lot of things, everything from the Cub Scouts right on up. It's not just presidential. So it's a lot of activity, and of course we do polling. The other thing we do, a lot of people don't realize this, so when you see, let's say, Governor Sununu or Senator Jeanne Shaheen on television on a national show, and you'll see these mill buildings behind them, we do most of the transmission of the major television shots
Right.
from the Institute as well. We have a full green room and makeup room. Everybody going on TV really needs makeup. The people who think they don't need makeup are the people who do need makeup. So we have all of that going on, and a lot of the activity it's a force multiplier. So what you have is you have this place centrally located in New Hampshire, in that hyper-political state of New Hampshire,
Yeah.
where all of the activity is just constantly flowing. And we're free and open to the public.
Yes, you
We want
are.
you to come.
You are, and it's if you have not been there, that is one thing you need to do before you leave this state, because it is a museum in and of itself. And Neil will give you a personal tour, and he has some really fascinating artifacts there. And children come to visit. Don't schools come to visit?
Oh, absolutely. We have all kinds of different schools. We have a lot of adult groups. I have an adult group coming from another state on Friday. We have a lot of people come from other states, and they can't believe how engaged we are in politics. But you're right about the artifacts. We have, that 1980 Reagan debate that I mentioned. When he went back to Manchester, he went to the Howard Johnsons, and he toasted a champagne glass to his victory. We have the champagne glass. You could throw it across the room and it won't break because it's a Howard Johnson's champagne glass, good for a lot of different weddings. And we have, different things that different presidents have signed.
Yes.
We have all of our Politics and egg series where they sign the wooden egg. That was a tradition that John McCain started. And the first person we had for Politics and Eggs, that great series, was Jack Kemp. And if you'll remember, and I say this to my students and they kind of gloss over because they weren't born when the television show The West Wing was on television, but The West Wing highlighted our Politics and Eggs series with Josiah Bartlett.
Yeah,
President
I loved
Bartlett.
that program.
Yeah, it was
I
great.
just loved it.
I'm
Well,
waiting to watch some more of it next year when we don't have as much to watch on
Yeah,
television.
you're right. Oh, Neil, it's always such a pleasure to have you as a guest. And people, thank you so much for being with us today. And I do hope that you take a great interest in this unusual time that we have in our state at this particular time. And until the next time, be good, do good, be one.